Okay. I've been actively involved with the archaeology of northwestern Indiana since about 1974. Originally, there was a amateur archaeology group in northwestern Indiana. I got involved with them. When I went into graduate school, I became their advisor in the late 70s. Have been associated with them essentially ever since, but with the distance between northwestern Indiana and Terre Haute, Indiana, and for a while, Pennsylvania, I haven't been as involved lately as I have been in the past. I did recently finish my PhD. It was only a 16-year effort to get it done, but finally got it through. When you take it one class at a time, it does make it fairly slow. I have been working with Goodall for a long time. My undergraduate or my master's degree from Western Michigan dealt with Beveled ceramics from northwestern Indiana and western Michigan. Goodall has been around since 1941. It was first defined by George Quimby using ceramics from 10 sites, 9 in Michigan and 1 in Indiana, the Goodall Site. From that, he decided that they were all related, and he was going to call it the Goodall Focus. Well, that's stretched 250 miles, which is a little far for a focus. So the Goodall Focus was established in 41. He also did some work in the other, like 1942, 1944. And then it kind of just went stagnant for a while. In 1964, James Brown from Northwestern University decided he would look at a collection that was gathered from northwestern Indiana by Ernest Young from South Bend. And he used that to describe the fact that Goodall was more closely related to northern Illinois than it was to western Michigan. He calls it the northeast extension of the Savanna culture of the Illinois River. He and I have had some arguments on with that. So Goodall stays in place until my master's degree, my master's thesis in 81, when I say no, it's too big. There are 2 style zones. One, basically the Grand River, the Kalamazoo River, and the Muskegon River area, and then the St. Joe River and the Kankakee. Those 2 areas, not 1, but 2. Since then, I've divided it down even further. So that was the first dividing of Goodall to a smaller unit. Then Mark and I got involved with Goodall in the early 90s. And finally, we put out a paper in 2000 saying that this is the way it goes. Here's Goodall. Those are the dates for it. AD 1 to about AD 200. Before that, we have another group. This is all Middle Woodland, which dates about 250 BC to about 500 AD. And then we broke it down into basically 4 or 5 divisions. My dissertation primarily deals with those 2, Stillwell and Goodall. Something happens, which I'll just talk about a little bit later, at about AD 200 that changes things in the Kankakee Valley. Okay, I think we'll stop with that and we'll get the projector going so that we can see some pictures while I talk. The Goodall Farm is southeast of LaPorte on the edge of the Kankakee Marsh. You'll see some pictures.
Stillwell?
Stillwell is right on the border of northeast eastern LaPorte County and St. Joseph County, near Walkerton, the town of Walkerton.
Neither one of those lay right here.
Right here? No. However, the Goodall culture or the Goodall tradition is here.
Unfortunately.
Take it away, Bill.
Okay. What you see here is the area for Savanna, and actually Savanna does go out over to Missouri further, and Missouri's down here, and also a little bit further north. But this is Savanna. Here's Goodall. Even that's a little big now. Group of mounds up here called Norton Converse. Eastern Indiana is a totally different ballgame, so I don't even want to deal with them. This is our area right here. This is the Goodall tradition. You want to go to the next one, Mary? Okay. I have included extreme southwestern Michigan. This is the Gleam River Valley. This is New Buffalo there. Also, just a little bit into Illinois. The reason for this is one of the problems I was dealing with is trying to define the boundaries of the Goodall tradition. Where does it start? Where does it stop? And to do that, I looked at where the sites were happening, what were they doing at the sites, and also, of course, where we didn't find them, and their mounds, both large groups and small groups. Okay, so that's my research here. Next. Now we have to take into consideration the geography. We have the lake plain up here with your dunes and where the former lake beds of Lake Michigan were. We have the Valparaiso Moraine through here and prairie. This is all outwash plain, perfect for prairies. And then, of course, everybody knows the marsh. Go on to the next one, Mary. One of the local rivers up here, you know, it's floods. Everybody knows the Kankakee floods. This is the upper Kankakee. Okay, next. Early picture courtesy of John, showing the Kankakee Marsh as it existed about turn of the century. This is the lower Kankakee. You have large stratigraphic profiles, rocks exposed, that you don't see in the northern portion, or the northeastern portion, or the upper portion. And that's because right around Mounds, there is a bubble of basaltic rock, a little ridge, that actually dammed the Kankakee River. You had this huge black backflow of water to the northeast. Okay, next. You can see here another shot. All that rock exposed. Something we don't even see the rock up here. Now, this is the dam at Mounds. It's just a little bit of a rise. The water can go over it, but it just can't handle a large quantity at one time. So that's why it backs up.
That's a natural dam?
Natural dam. In fact, they have cut through parts of it to increase the water flow now. But before about 1910, I mean, there wasn't even that much water flow. The gradient or the flow of the river in the Indiana portion is less than 1 inch per mile. So it just barely moves. You get below the dam, there are places where it drops 6 feet in a mile. So it's a totally different area, totally different river environment. Okay. This is the way the marsh was approximately 1900. Coming all the way down into Jasper and Newton counties, all the way up to South Bend. But it stops at Moments, right here. It pinches off. Now, one other thing that's very important. See how the marsh does not extend up this way into Lake County? There's a moraine that comes right down here that controls the flow of the marsh northward. Once you get past that moraine, you can see it starts to seep further north. That had a big play in the settlement during the very early portion of the Middle Woodland. Okay, next. This is a little more of a detail. This is Lake County. All marsh here. Here's the river. Actually, the map should go on down further. Okay. Now, this is what it looks like in Newton County. It just keeps going. This is Beaver Lake, or part of Beaver Lake. Beaver Lake at one point was about that big. And at times in the early settlement, that lake was so covered with migratory waterfowl that you couldn't see the water. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of birds at one time.
Where is Utica?
Morocco. You know Morocco? How about Rensselaer? West of Rensselaer. It's the last county before you get into Illinois.
How deep was Beaver Lake approximately?
No more than about 20 feet. Pretty shallow. Now, this is the way I started, by locating the archaeological sites that were known and are known into the various areas. Like this is the marsh, here's the moraine, this is the lake plain. So you can see that there's starting to be a division. You've got plenty in the marsh, you've got quite a few in the lake plain, you've got one in the moraine. Okay, Mary?
Where's that one in the moraine?
This one is in LaPorte County. But we'll go into the next slide and see a little more.
All these dots are archaeological sites?
Yes.
That somebody has dug in?
They've been recorded. I have seen collections from every one of those sites. And in some cases, one dot may cover 5 or 6 sites. Because the site doesn't have to be very big. This is Lake County. And again, this is a little more detailed. All the site locations are in the southern half, and then a few in the moraine or lake plain, and just a couple right on the edge of the moraine. But it's kind of a special case because there is a small lake there. So it's a unique situation within the moraine. So for some reason, they're ignoring this section. Two things. Prairie and moraine. Prairie has very few resources. You might have a deer wander through or a duck fly over, but for something that they could count on, no. Moraines, same thing. You can gather nuts in it or something like that, but have abundant wildlife to sustain people for a long period of time? No. Okay, next one. This is Porter County. Same thing, Lake Plain and in the Marsh. That's it.
They've done more digs in Lake County than they have in Porter County.
Well, those aren't necessarily digs, but they are recorded archaeological sites. The triangles are mound groups. It's just because that we know that of a site doesn't mean it's been excavated.
Well, define then what an archaeological site is.
An archaeological site is any piece of ground that shows evidence of prehistoric occupation. It could be gathered from the surface, it could be excavated. In a lot of cases, they've been surface collected by collectors in the area. And actually, that's much better than being excavated because the information is not being destroyed. Archaeological excavation is nothing more than scientific destruction. You can't replace it. Once it's disturbed, its information value is gone. That's why recording of information during an excavation is critical.
And these are sites that were inhabited by people 2,000 years ago about.
Right. These are all Middle Woodland sites. For example, we've got two mound groups down here. I don't remember exactly what those are right offhand. But most of the mounds in northwestern Indiana have been dug into. That was the big thing in the 1917, 1920, 1900, that you dug into the mounds. You got artifacts. You sold them. There are, well, let's take, for example, the Goodall Site. The Goodall Site had 22 known burial mounds, ranging in size from the size of this room to twice the size of this room, and maybe as tall as, well, taller than the ceiling. Most of them were dug into between 1860 and 1890.
And where is that site located?
Goodall Site? It's about 15 miles southeast of LaPorte. So it's right on the edge of the Kankakee Marsh.
Bill, is there a consensus as to where these people inhabited these areas, where they came from, where they arrived from?
Well, they're probably locals that have been developing in situ in this general area. However, the influences were primarily coming from the Illinois River Valley during the Middle Woodland period. So, excuse me.
Excuse me. I'm sorry.
I'd like to ask everybody to turn their cell phones off.
The mounds at Goodall, for example, were heavily dug into to the point where you couldn't see where a mound existed. It was flat. And I tracked artifacts down in 14 states that came from the Goodall Mounds. So just trying to get that information together in one location is difficult enough. Yes?
What is in that? Where is that that mound now? Can you go and see it, or?
Well, you couldn't see anything because all the mounds had been completely destroyed.
Oh, is it farmland then, or?
It was farmland. It's now partially owned by the Archaeological Conservancy
Oh.
to help protect it, because work that Notre Dame and I did at the site proved that even though the appearance of the mound is gone. There's still information in the ground. When people were digging into these things to get artifacts to sell, they missed an awful lot. For example, in one area around one tomb, we came up with a mica mirror. The mica came from the Appalachian Mountains. We found copper that came from the Keweenaw Peninsula, Michigan. We found conch shell that came from the Gulf of Mexico, all being brought into northwestern Indiana. But this was what was left behind. It's important information. Okay, next. Okay, here is LaPorte County. Here's Goodall, right there. LaPorte is right in here. This is the Bellinger Site. This is Union Mill Mounds. This one is Goods Ford, which is not a Mound Group, but it is a site. And the Kankakee River, the Marsh, came right up into here. In fact, looking at the old maps and the soil types, we can tell that where the mounds were at Goodall, was an island. There was water all the way around it. Important information, because a lot of Native American cultures thought that water was a ghost boundary. Ghosts would not cross water. So if you buried them on an island, they're going to stay there. They're not going to wander around. Okay, next. Okay, here's Jasper Count. What do you notice about this? 1, 2, everything else is right along the river. They did not go south. And we'll talk about why in just a few minutes. Okay, next. Okay, this is in the lake plain. This is an interdunal lake. You have sand dunes on both sides. You have probably a stream that came through here and it's flooded. Makes a beautiful habitat for ducks, for vegetable material, for fish. Excellent resource in the dunes. Okay, next. This is south of the dunes. This is called an oak savanna. You can have acorns, but acorns take an awful lot of processing to eat. You cannot eat a raw acorn because it's high in tannic acid. They have to be processed. So there's not a whole lot of things here to eat. Okay, next. Another kind of view of a savanna area. Next. Now, this is probably what it looked like in parts of the marsh. Here is water, standing water, and up here is actually an island with oak trees on it, or other nut trees. So that's high and dry. Important if you're going to be living someplace. You want to stay dry. Also, while we don't eat acorns, deer do. And they tend to herd or gather together in the winter in woods. Okay, next. Now, who wants to live along the lake during the winter? Not me. Although I've camped in the lake or along the lake in January. intense. So I know what it's all about. Cindy, have you done any camping up there that time? Mm-hmm. Fun, isn't it? So we know that they're not up around the lake during the winter. Okay, next. And I wouldn't want to be there in July with all the mosquitoes. So we've kind of ruled out the swamps in the summer and the lake in the winter. So it doesn't have to go too much further than that. Okay, next. To see that they're going up around the lake to harvest fish, fruit, anything else that it can gather along the lake during the spring and summer, heading back down into the marsh area during the late fall and winter. And that's backed up by the artifacts. There are very few artifacts along the lake plain. Occasionally some ceramics, some other tools, but not a whole lot. And when there are artifacts, they're small. Something that you would carry easily. They weren't also digging very deep fire pits because there wasn't any need for heating. They made their campfires right on the surface. You get down into the marsh area, those pits are deep. There's a lot of firecracked rock in it, producing a lot of heat, which is indicative of a winter camp. Okay, now this is southwestern Michigan. This is the Gleam River basin. This is the St. Joe River. Here again, along the lake plain, there's two mound groups there. And then we have some scattered ones to the inland. But I found that every one of those sites in the inland are associated with marshes. So they're probably doing the same thing in southwestern Michigan, but on a much narrower level than we're doing in the Kankakee. They were going to the beach in the summer, just like everybody else does, and then away from the beach to the swamps and marshes during the winter. Okay? Now, I had to take into consideration a couple of sites in Illinois, trying to find if that boundary was moments or did it actually go beyond. So here we have an area of some sites, and we'll see in just a second. More important, these are the major mound groups to the west of Goodall. This is Utica. No, think about it. This is Utica.
That's what?
Utica Mound Group. It's the biggest mound group in the northern Illinois River Basin. Nothing like them. Absolutely nothing like them. The pottery is made different, although it's decorated the same, but whoever was making it was not making it like Goodall people. So we know that Goodall didn't go any further than that. Okay, next one. Here are 5 sites just east of the confluence of the Kankakee, the lower Kankakee, and the Des Plaines River. These 5 sites are provided to me by a collector over there. They're wonderful middle of them sites, ton of pottery, a few vessels like Goodall, but all the rest are more like northern Illinois. So this is right on the edge, if not just beyond Goodall. Okay, next. Here are all the mounds between, well, essentially the edge of the marsh here up to the St. Joe River. Now you can see the purplish ones are mound groups, more than 2. Then we have some that are paired, just 2 of them there, and then these are isolated 1 mound, single mounds.
no mounds that left?
No mounds
None
left.
of them are there.
None of them are there. You cannot see them. Yes.
What about them, they say that there's a mound there, John Wood's, mill on, is that, because that's supposed to be a mound and it's supposed to be flat iron shaped.
I'm not familiar with it.
And they have had stories in the, Post Tribune a couple times, within, say 1980s, 90s.
Surely.
But it's supposed to be in the park itself.
I read about it, yeah. It's a
And then
weird-
there's supposed to be a deep pit beside it that never gets filled up with trash.
It's by
Um,
Deep River.
Like Deep River?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard of that one, but they don't think that's a prehistoric mound.
Oh,
It may have been a former foundation for something, but it's not prehistoric.
and it's not part of this at all.
No, not at all.
Well, are there any, museums or visitor centers or anything like that by any of these?
No.
You can see, you can't
None.
see any of their
Most of these are gone. Most of the artifacts have been scattered throughout the eastern United States and beyond. Matter of fact, I found artifacts from Indiana at the University of New Mexico, in Albuquerque.
Is there any place that anybody can see the artifacts, any of the artifacts in this area?
Some of the artifacts are at the Field Museum. I don't know whether they're on display or not. There are some artifacts at IU in the Glenn Black Lab of Archaeology that came from Goodall and a few other places. But the number of artifacts on display is probably less than 2 dozen. Again, most of them have been sold off. There's some in the British Museum. You want to go to England to see them. Because people in the 1880s didn't think they were worth anything.
But you've been able to study them, though. Did you have to travel all these places to study them?
I went to 13 different states to look at artifacts from the Goodall tradition.
Phil,
Yeah,
where are the last artifacts you took out of Goodall?
they're at Notre Dame.
They're at Notre Dame?
Yeah,
They're not on display, right?
no, not now.
No, the dig there at Collier's Lodge, that's been, showing Goodall.
There had a little bit of it, yes, but not a whole lot. It's more Mississippian, which is later than Goodall. I think there's been one sherd, possibly Goodall, or Bill Woodland.
We've gotten a fair amount of Beveled fire pits. Upper Mississippi.
Upper Mississippi, yeah.
Are there photographs of the kinds of things you're talking about? Photos?
You'll see a couple of photos here in a second. Remember I was saying that this area of the marsh was special because it was so condensed? This is where we find the earliest middle woodland occupations in northwestern Indiana. That's the earliest. So when they're coming in from Illinois, this is where they're stopping first and then spreading out. And not only that, but if you look at the mound groups, they're pretty well along the edge of the marsh. Something happened after 200 AD where almost all these mound groups were abandoned. We find no artifacts, for example, up in this area or these that are classic Hopewell, which stops at about 100 AD. It's just not happening anymore. Whether there's a breakdown in their culture, whether they're just not trading with the lower Illinois anymore, we don't know. They may have had a population spurt to the point where they couldn't be in one area anymore. They had to spread out. That is a question for someone else. But as you can see, only where the marsh tends to be narrower do you see mound groups. You don't see any mound groups to the south. Okay, next. This is Goodall ceramics. These ceramics, rim sherds, tops of pots, date before 81. Now, what I did with the ceramics, I took examples from about 16 sites. Had a friend of mine who's a geologist make a thin cut across one edge. And then you take that little thin sliver, you glue it to a piece of glass, and you grind it thinner yet until it's less than, about 120th of an inch thick. So that we can see what they were putting into the clay as tempering agent, and that helps us say where it's being made at and what culture was making it. Another thing, great big teeth marks like this are very similar to sherds from the same time period in the Middle Illinois River Valley. So this may have been people that were trained in the Middle Illinois that are now in Indiana. Okay, next. This is an early sherd too. This is probably 200 BC. It's called Hummel. This is a tool. It's a curved tool that has little teeth carved into it. But this person would put a row of them that way, and then he'd flip it over so you have this continuous line. It's the one stamp is only like from here to here. So by doing a line, flipping the stamp over to the other direction, makes the other part of the curve.
What do you think they made those stamps out of?
Wood or bone. And you can tell when the stamp starts to get dirty because you don't get as clean of an impression. And these tools are probably handed down from one person to another. Okay, go ahead, Mary. This is a little later one. This is from the Gleam River. Somebody found that in their garden. In pieces. Of course, I had to put it back together as best I could. Okay. Now, this one was cut off, but these are from Indiana Dunes National Park. So they're very similar to some of the other Middle Woodland, but not very big. Some of those first vessels could hold 5 gallons of water. So they were good size. These were small jar size.
Well, this is pottery.
This is pottery. You can see here that they've taken a tool and pushed it into the back of the clay to make a bump, what we call a boss. So it's like a little pimple on the outside. And then took a clamshell and rocked it back and forth to create those lines. Just kind of.
So that's on the outside of
That's on the outside.
pottery.
Okay, Mary? This is some of the earliest Middle Woodland. And all they did was they took some clay between their fingers and pinched it. You can still see the fingernail impressions. And this is all from Lower Lake and Newton County. So this is where they were coming into.
That's the outside of the boat.
That's the outside. Here's
And
the
the
top
pinch.
of, here's the rim right here.
The pinch is a design, or does it have a purpose?
It's a design. Okay? And it's a complete Middle Woodland Hopewell pot. You see the rim up there. It's divided or zoned into different areas that are decorated. Some areas are left plain.
What size is that?
Well, this is 2 inches here. So that's probably 8 inches high.
Always curious about why they made the bottoms brown.
Because they put them into ash, your fire pits. You couldn't put something flat because it'd probably tip over. You'd actually take this rounded bottom and kind of screw it into the coals and into the ash to support it. Okay, next. Now, this is looking at a slice of a pot. These big chunks are feldspar. They look like quartzite, it's feldspar. And they're probably about that big in reality. But now, this is a metamorphic rock, like basalt. It's a different type of rock. So you get a mixture of different things. Now, basaltic rock in this region is mostly found along the beach. This sherd came from Indiana Goodall. So they were getting their material for tempering the pot, probably from the beach. Because here's another big piece of metamorphic rock.
What color is this?
Pretty close to what you're seeing. This would be white. This is kind of a greenish. And all the rest of the actual clay is brown. Okay?
There is a clay that you see along the lake shore at the base of the dunes.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's a gray clay.
Right, it's a gray clay.
What does, is that clay that they used in pottery or?
From best we can tell, yes. However, it takes some digging in some cases to get down to it. Some of it is exposed along the lake shore. But right along the bottom of Lake Michigan, that layer of clay is almost 60 feet thick. But you'd have to get down to it. And I didn't do any chemical analysis of the clay to compare whether that clay and the clay that comes from the lake plain is the same. I didn't have the technology or the expertise to do that. Yes, ma'am?
Is that blue clay or the grayish clay, is that the higher quality? Much
It's
finer
very good
texture, what they use
very
for the
good
better
quality,
brick that you'll
but
see?
it fires light tan. It does not fire gray. Okay. Yes. Someone? Okay, now look at this one. Do you see much tempering there? Granted, it kind of petered out here as the grinding process took away a little too much. But it's sand tempered. We have no sand tempered pottery in northwestern Indiana. This was brought in. This whole pot was brought in as a trade item. This is called a Brandenburg pottery. Comes from lower Illinois Valley. So just by looking at the tempering, we know that it didn't come from here. Okay, Mary? Goodall has a very unique characteristic with their rims. This is the lip of the rim, the top of the pot, but the slope towards the inside is very sharp. In fact, this is now called a Goodall beveled rim because it's not found anywhere else. It's only found in Goodall.
So we're looking at the inside of the pot.
This is the inside. Here is the end of the bevel. Here's the front over on this side.
What was the tempering?
It's feldspar. Yeah. Okay, John?
What's the difference between sand, grit, or sand, temper and grit?
Grit is heavier rock. Sand is very small grains. I mean, some of it's actually beach sand. When you look at it under a very high-powered microscope, you can see that beach sand is actually rounded and polished from being moved by the wind. Whereas with that one shirt a few minutes ago, that is just plain sand that somebody would get off the ground. But you can tell, even in some of the sherds that I looked at, it did have beach sand in it. And that was probably because it was made in the dunes, and in the process of making the pot, picked up some sand. Okay. One other thing that's unique to Goodall, well, it's not unique to Goodall, but it was found here first. This rim is crosshatched, left to right and right to left, except right here. And it's evenly spaced around the rim. You'll have a crosshatched area, then you'll have an area that's not, then you'll have an area that's crosshatched and an area that's not. It alternates all the way around the rim. The vessels from Goodall were intact enough after pieced together that we were able to decipher that. That interrupted crosshatch pattern had been seen in the Illinois River Valley, but because the vessels were so incomplete, they couldn't tell the pattern. But fortunately enough, we have it up here. Now, one other little special thing. These indentations are kind of oval, kind of teardrop shape. But then in here, you have a little circular indentation as well. It's made by a feather. The end of a quill of a feather and poked into the clay.
So the center circle is convex?
No, it's actually, well, concave. What it is, the feather has an opening in the bottom for the attachment to the skin.
Okay.
It's called the umbellus, I believe. Umbellus.
So the oval is concave, but the center is convex.
Yeah, it comes out a little bit. So this type of punctation is only found on Hopewell pots, Hopewell style pots, crosshatch rim pots. Now, whether that was ritualistic, whether the bird is playing an important part in this ritual, we don't know. But the only reason we found that out is because I was messing around making pottery, trying different things, trying to get this matched, and happened to try a feather. And it matches perfectly. Mary?
On the crosshatching, I know it's, decorative, but also could it serve another purpose that it made it more stable, and that's why you found larger pieces?
No. One thing it might do is make you be able to grip onto the rim a little better, because the texture.
While we're talking about making pottery, I want to announce that there's going to be a fellow making pottery over an open campfire at the National Lakeshore Bathing Homestead this weekend.
I heard very good. I don't remember if he's a native or not, or whether he's just learning the process.
I don't know either.
Because it is a tricky process, and hopefully it won't be windy.
Put up wind shields if it is. I've seen it done with wind shields.
It's very critical to get an even temperature that it's a calm day. I've made quite a few. Yeah.
This cross-hatching, is that vertical on the outside of the rim, or is that
This
a
is
wide,
the outside.
flat room?
No, it's diagonal. It's diagonal.
Well, yeah, I get that, but I mean, the diagonal part is on the outside of the
It's
edge.
on the outside of the rim.
It's not a flat edge like that.
No, it's actually kind of bulged out a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, I think that's the last one. Oh, no, this one's important. Remember we were talking about tools? This is a very unique tool. It leaves a very unique impression. Here is the tool, and then it comes down here and it jags back up again. It has an extension that you see here, 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 with each one of these stamps. It is a unique stamp. But I have found pottery using that stamp as a decorative tool on 6 different sites. And they weren't next to one another either. Between one site and another, maybe as far as 15 to 16 miles. So this was one potter whose pottery found its way to 6 different sites over a 16-mile radius. Yes?
Would that be the same tool? Were they all the same size, or were they?
They were all the same size. It's one tool. So again, this is one that was probably handed down from father or from parent to child. It's thought that most of the pottery was done by women, but that's still being debated.
And so you're gonna tell us what that tool is?
It is a carved stamp.
Oh, you think it's carved?
It is definitely carved. But why this little triangular piece was not corrected, I don't know. Maybe they like that.
Did these people have a name, and are there any theories about where they came from or where they went?
Okay. Names without recorded history, you have no idea what they called themselves. That's why it's called the Goodall tradition, because we just have to name it something.
They're just primitive peoples.
Well, I don't think they're primitive.
Well, not primitive, yeah, kind of by our
They're prehistoric people.
prehistoric, okay.
As far as where they came from, we think that most of these people were indigenous to northwestern Indiana. But the ideas, and in some cases actual pottery and actual tools, are coming up from the Illinois River Valley. And maybe some people too. But we can't say that everybody in northwestern Indiana came from southern Indiana or southern Illinois.
So this was found in northwestern Indiana?
Yes.
And the 6 other sites were all in northwestern Indiana?
The furthest apart was about 16 miles. But if somebody wasn't paying attention and looking at this stuff under a microscope, I'm sure it's been missed. Other archaeologists have looked at this stuff and never called it out as being important.
How big is this little design?
The shirt is about that size.
Oh, this is the whole shirt.
The whole shirt.
So it's very tiny.
Oh, it's tiny.
Design.
That's what I'm saying. I'm looking at them with microscopes and high-powered magnifying glasses. That's the thing now, is that when you're not bringing up as many artifacts as you have in the past, because archaeologists can't dig as much because of the cost, for one thing, you have to go back to the older stuff that was excavated or collected 100 years ago and re-look at it, find things that the other people haven't found, so that you keep getting new information from older pieces that have been collected. Any questions? Mary?
And you said that, you took the very, very fine shavings, so then that leaves the rest intact for further studies?
That's right. In fact, I specifically requested when the slices were made, that was always on an edge that had been broken. I didn't want to take an intact edge that may at some point in the future be able to be put back together. And I also wanted rims kept intact, so they had to be just below the rim. Yes?
Is all this pottery really smooth inside, or?
Most of it is smooth quite well on the inside. Occasionally in the earlier period, like the early woodland, the inside was rough as well as the outside.
How thick was the pottery?
For early woodland, thick. And the jars were large. You could not carry them from one site to another. You'd leave them at a site and come back to it. And they were probably for long period cooking, like maybe boiling water for days at a time.
Maple syrup.
Possibly, or nut oil. Because by taking a hickory nut, let's say, putting a bunch of hickory nuts in water and boiling it, the oil will rise to the surface, and all you have to do is just skim it off. And it has all the nutrition of trying to break it apart and getting the meats out with 1/50th the amount of energy to get to it.
We boil the whole nut?
The whole nut.
Where does Marion Thick fit in?
Marion Thick is early woodland. Right at the edge where it's cord marked on both sides.
We've got several pieces.
Yeah, I've seen.
Nice.
Mhm.
This year too.
Which is nice because there isn't that much early woodland known in the Kankakee. I know of maybe 6 sites where it has early woodland pottery. So another one is good.
We got one really nice and put together.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, Mayor.
Okay, just, I probably don't know the answer, but I'm not sure. How, like when you talk about the oils and, the nutrition, was it just by trial and error that it wasn't something poisonous, first of all? I mean, I realize people must have learned things were poisonous because someone dropped dead or got really ill from it. Or,
Actually, other cultures were doing the same thing.
and how did they know?
Well, it may have been something that was passed down, or they were in contact with another group that did it. You can learn trial and error by independent invention, or by learning it from someone else. Yes?
Glazes.
None. They had slips, but not glazes. For example, one type of Middle Woodland Hopewell vessels were coated with red clay, a red slip. So that it would have like a red inside and then the natural clay on the outside. And they would also burnish it. You know what burnishing is?
No.
You rub it with a stone.
Oh, okay, so rub it and rub it.
And rub it 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 some more. But that would make the surface shiny. Now, if you're having a ritual by firelight, having your pottery kind of glimmer and glow as the light bounces off of it may have been important, because some of these Hopewell vessels are burnished in certain areas and not in others. Not the entire surface was burnished. Certain parts of the design may have been burnished. So, yes?
Did we find any of the slips being the black slip?
No.
Because Francisville has black slip.
Is it a slip or is it actually clay?
Well, it's clay, you put a lot of water in and make it slip. That's
Yeah,
the
but-
same with New Albany.
The You know what time period it's from?
Modern.
Well,
because
yeah,
they were-
prehistorically, they didn't do any black slip.
Well, I wondered why, because that was a remarkable find as far as the potters were concerned.
Most of the pottery or the clay that was available in this area, even if it was black, would fire white or tan.
Ours fires red.
Well,
Even the
reddish
blue-
tan, yeah,
Even the blue clay, because of all the iron,
Right.
Kankakee fires red.
right. But you will not get a black slip because all that will fire out.
Well, that's why that from Francisville was so unusual.
Well, it's also historic,
Yeah.
and they were
I
using
doubt it.
chemicals at that point.
No,
create
no,
slip.
no chemicals.
You said it was made historically,
Yeah, because that's when I knew it was.
okay? But we're talking prehistoric cultures.
I know, I wanted to know if there were any that used it. You don't think so?
No. To get a black shiny surface, you have to use a different type of firing method.
Smoke.
No, smoke. Well, you'll get a stain from fire, but it's not a slip. It's just a change in color of the clay. It's burnt.
Well, this, they were making field tile at Francisville.
Okay.
Black. And I wondered if they were just using clay and it was.
And maybe the
black.
prehistoric people hadn't found that.
Well, that may be a clay source that they weren't aware of.
Well, that's, even modern people weren't, because when
Are
I
you done
found
with this?
No, there's still
a
this one.
potter that, said there wasn't any black slip or black clay except in New Albany, New York. And I told him there was some at Francisville, and he put down
Well,
to find out.
Like I said, it may not have been available to the Native Americans because
Well,
all the pottery that I've ever seen from Indiana that dates before 1600 does not have any black
yeah.
slips.
Maybe they were afraid of it. Maybe it meant
Maybe.
death.
So the pieces of pottery that we dug up there at, Collier's Lodge, some of that was very, very dark.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can get smoke or burn.